welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by the author of an absolutely fascinating and moving work of historical fiction, a place and time that is very near and dear to my heart, and I am so excited to get to talk about it. So welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Yeah, Jen, first, just thank you for having me on your podcast. It's such a pleasure. Gigi Berardi is my name, and I do have a day job. I am a full-time professor at a College of the Environment in Bellingham, Washington, and I commute from Shaw Island, a small island where my writing cabin is, and I write journalism and usually nonfiction and creative nonfiction, typically. And so this work, Bianca's Cure, is in the theme of my personal work, science and being a woman in science. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, I am so excited to talk about this book because just to get it out in the clear very early on, I studied abroad in Florence when I was an undergrad, and it's like still like it's when I peaked. It was like the best time of my life, and I loved
Oh, wow.
living in Florence and learning about the history of both the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. It's just one of my absolute favorite subjects, so I was so excited to read this one. Um,
Oh, boy, that's exciting. Yeah.
I'm always interested when a writer is heading into a new genre because you've also written about, I believe, food and dance as well, I think, which is so interesting. What new, what new challenges did writing fiction present for you? And how do you think your nonfiction background, what advantages do you think it gave you?
Oh, I think my nonfiction background was a hindrance. And and I'll tell you why. Because I wrote the first 100,000 words from the standpoint of Francesco, from a male perspective, a male Medici, and I had to throw out every word. And the reason is that it read like a Wikipedia article. So that is the advice I got from various editors and consultants. They said, this is a 100,000 word Wikipedia article. And once I got over that, because I have a hard time if I have to throw away a single sentence, much less 100,000 words. I approached the book differently, and I knew it had to be written from the standpoint of Bianca, of Francesco's great love in the book, and also in the Renaissance by the documentation that we've got. And so I started to work with a woman, just real quickly, Susan Sutliff Brown, who I had met at a writers' conference in San Miguel de Allende right before COVID and hit. And um, there she had a workshop. What are the 12 great uh, pieces to a blockbuster? And uh, and I started to work with her and develop with her these tonal narratives, which is I would take an event like Bianca meets Francesco on the street, and then I would, while still maintaining the basic idea, try different tones like shock, horror, delight, and I would write a paragraph or two. And this is how I started to get, and then select the one that rang most true. And this is how I started to get into the persona of Bianca and her quest, her external quest.
That's fascinating. And what a fascinating figure. I'm very embarrassed almost that I did not really learn that much about her while I was there or in the
Hmm.
interim. And what a fascinating figure, but also what a, I can imagine controversial and highly charged one. So, what was it that drew you to her, and what kind of research did you do to get inside of her head?
Right. Okay, so those are two different
Yeah,
questions.
sorry.
Um, yeah, no, that's okay. Drew me, what drew me to her was that I knew that she also had an interest in alchemy. So it turns out that the Medici, and in particular at this time, Cosimo, Francesco's father, and Francesco, but also Cosimo's grandmother, had a very big interest in alchemy and in occult science. And you can see this in, I don't know if when you were in Florence, if you saw Francesco's secret room in the Palazzo Vecchio
Mm.
and Cosimo's secret room. Well, Bianca had a secret room too. So Francesco gave Bianca, the protagonist in my novel, his mother's study. I knew she had this study, and by all accounts, she too was interested in alchemy or early science. And so I thought the interest for me was that here was a woman interested in early science in male and other kind of dominant structures who no doubt would have a hard time. I knew that. And then I knew that Francesca was absolutely crazy, madly in love with her for decades and decades. That is obvious. It is all over Florence once you know what to look for. So
Mm.
Bianca's palace is still there with the plaque, Bianca's palace, that he that he built for her. And the fact that after 15 years of being his mistress, they married after Joanna's mysterious death, wife, is a tribute to their lasting love. So that was super interesting for me. And even if you ask taxi drivers, maybe you didn't have the chance to do this, about Bianca and Francesco, the taxi driver, they will say that theirs was a great love, and that's what kind of exists in Florence as a story. Then I know that on the Piazza della Santa Annunziata, where you find the Hospital of the Innocents and the Hotel Loggiati dei Serviti, which is where I'm having a reception, by the way, for
Oh,
the Italian version of the book, which comes out today. And that's going to be on May 19th and at the British Institute on May 17th in Florence. Um, yeah, then I knew that on the piazza there's this famous bronze statue of Ferdinando, who's the cardinal in my book, on a horse pointing to an open window, and there's a legend of the open window that there's a woman there. And I was told it was the spirit of Bianca Capello, and I love this, that she would have this antagonist, Ferdinando, and what happened with that. Then I knew also that purportedly Francesco and Bianca died or were killed somehow on the same day at Poggio a Caiano, which I've been to a number of times. And Francesco's body was put into the chapel of the princes, this huge, huge mausoleum near the San Lorenzo Basilica. And it's been exhumed several times because people have suspected that Ferdinando killed him. And they're looking for traces of arsenic poisoning our malaria parasites. And this was very interesting that these two great loves would die, if indeed she did. That's an open question in my book, in this way. That was my interest. The research, honestly, a lot of the research is what I said in the beginning was with the tonal exercise. And of course, I just walked and walked and went into all the buildings, including one time I snuck into legal offices that overlooked the actual garden where Bianca worked, where I say that Bianca worked, and where Michelangelo was found. And in fact, there's a little plaque on the outside of the doors that says, this is the garden where Michelangelo was founded by Lorenzo Magnifico of the Medici. And then I got all the historians I knew to walk with me and talk with me, and we talked about what was possible in the story and also what was likely in terms of Bianca and Francesco's relationship, who they were to each other, and what she did in terms of her own work. And they would line edit both version 1 and version 2 for me. And I would add, so I have a version of this that has like thousands of comments about, oh, yeah, this could have happened. No, actually, the word caught was used in 1560, that kind of thing.
I love that. And that's so funny because the first time I went to Florence, I was a scholarship kid and they sent us
Yeah.
on like a little trip. We stayed at a little hotel that's right on the corner of Santa Annunziata, right, sort of next to the hospital. And so I can picture that statue and where it is so perfectly. I sat on those steps
Yeah,
there so many times and ate like a delicious panini from while looking at that statue. Was there also research that you did into pre-modern or early modern medicine and herbology?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So the so the word malaria is an Italian word. And it means, as you know, malaria, bad air. But that is a 19th century confection, construction. Malaria was a very, very big problem in Italy through the time of Mussolini, who is reported to have cleaned up, at least in Tuscany, a lot of the wetland areas and to try and destroy the vector's habitat. Um, and many of the Medici died of it. So I looked at herbal preparations and eventually, which would have been available at the time, something other than bloodletting or administering, mercury metal, um, and found that Artemisia was therapeutic and is still used today. And in fact, as I mentioned in 2015, a woman in China, Tu Youyou, won the Nobel Prize for in medicine or physiology for her discovery of Artemisia annua as a cure for malaria. And she was the first Chinese national, male or female, to get a Nobel Prize in any scientific category, who was not trained outside of China. So first Chinese national. Anyway, and she looked at thousands of years of Artemisia and its use. And for sure, Artemisia would have been in the herbalist's repertoire at the time of Bianca and Francesco. So I had to look at how the Artemisia annua behaves. We know Artemisia as mugwort and wormwood and vermouth, which
Mm.
is a German word which means wormwood, that distillation. And the Artemisia annua is a very, very bitter herb. So I did do research on that. Yeah.
Wow. That's always so fascinating to me. I love the history of medicine, especially as it pertained to women. Because something that you capture very well, a very important nuance, I feel like, is that, for a very long time, medicine or sort of like the sort of everyday healthcare of your family, the people around you, would have been women's work. But at the same time, if you got a little bit too ambitious, went a little bit too far, that opened you up to some pretty dangerous accusations.
Exactly right. So it's always a question of working kind of horizontally in the system rather than vertically. So you don't have to ask and kind of beg for recognition or for resources, but how to work within the system and still be able to make progress. Yeah.
Absolutely. What went into characterizing Bianca? And I'm curious about what your approach is, particularly to, you know, I guess identifying like the gaps in the sources, right? Because women just aren't as represented in the sources as men were at the time. And, where you conform to what's in the sources and where you get creative.
It's really, there really aren't many sources, so it's really more the composite story that we've got now.
Mm.
And I pretty much was able to stick to that. But you're right, if we just used the documentation that's available, it would have been a two-page story. So we know the woman Bianca, we know she existed. We know that she was in Florence. We know that at the time, sorry, she existed. We know that she was in Venice. We know that at the time when she was there and very young, we know when she was born and where she was born and who her parents were. We know that her father had a great interest in disease and disease prevention, and he himself really did support these sick houses. We've got that documentation. So she has that story growing up and that work. We know that women at this time in Venice who had any kind of money were interested in medicine for all the reasons that you had said. And in fact, Meredith Ray has written a great book called Daughters of Alchemy, and that book is published by Harvard University Press. And she documents, even using some of the same names that I did, because I hadn't read her book when I first started. Cortese, that her name is actually an anagram. It's an anagram, which you probably know, for the Italian word segreto. So it's an anagram for the word secret in Italian. We also know, incidentally, that Cosimo's grandmother, so Francesco's great-great-grandmother, was Caterina Sforza, who's a huge historic personality, and that Bianca would have been under that kind of influence when she was with Francesco. We know that she escaped Florence. She was escaping her father with Piero when she was about 15, that she arrived, that somehow the Medici family were friends with Bartolomeo or enemies or had some kind of relationship, and they themselves arranged the marriage with Piero and Bianca. We know that Bianca met Francesco, and there's many stories as to why, as to how this happened. But Piero's house would have been just on the other side of the garden from the casino where Francesco worked. We know that. We also know that she became Francesco's mistress and for 15 years, and she had a child. There's some discussion as to, whose child that was or who was the actual mother, Antonio's mother. But Francesco took him to be his and Bianca's. We know that. And that they got married. There's a record. We know that Francesco built Bianca a palace on Via Maggio. And then we know that they were at Poggio a Caiano. We also know that Pratolino, this amazing wonderland outside of Florence, was built for Bianca. And we still have the gargoyles and gods and nymphs and statues that are in that park. So that's what we know. So the structure is kind of well known and well documented. Then to get into Bianca, I drew from my own personal history and work as a woman in science, and then using these tonal exercises with, every impediment that she had, how would she have reacted to that? And just kept writing, trying to get into that voice that Bianca had that seemed to be most realistic, and I chose that in writing.
Mm. Yeah, something I, excuse me, something I say a lot when I am interviewing authors of historical fiction, especially with women protagonists, is that you have to walk a very delicate line where they are slightly modern and that they will appeal to a modern reader, but also they have to be of their time, and I think she manages to be both very well.
Oh, thank you. I have gotten really interesting reactions, especially when the book was on NetGalley before it came out, and from women, and they tend to be either the reactions, either who is this person? She is so strident, she is so difficult, she is so difficult to love. And the other side is like, really? Every woman I know who's working is kind of like this, and I did read it and reread it, and so did my editors, for ways that we could soften Bianca. And each time we were like, oh, no, this is actually an appropriate response at that time. I, I, I think it might be interesting to add too that she was a great babe. She was an incredible beauty. Not to me, frankly, but at least in terms of the pictures that I'm seeing, but to men. And I know this because we have poets writing poems to her and people documenting visits and talking about her great beauty. So she was a voluptuous, non-bimbo, but smart thinking gal. And I guess that was incredibly appealing at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, she seemed to have captivated her society, and she certainly captivated me reading this. It was a really interesting window into a history that I, thought I was fairly familiar with, but I got to
Mhm.
experience it from a very different angle. Um,
Mhm.
so my wrap-up question is always, what is next for the author I'm talking to? Do you think you will write more historical fiction or fiction? What's next for you?
Well, I do have some ideas about where to go next, uh, and if Bianca lives, she may well find herself in a monastery. And so I've been researching monasteries and trying to find stories there that she could get into. Um, and actually on my website, what I have done, so I'm putting quite a bit of effort into this, gigiberardi.com. I am answering readers' questions and kind of taking that on and like, what is next? What would she be doing? And just for right now, I've been so busy with, I think the audiobook came out 2 weeks ago and the Italian book comes out today. And now we're working on a German translation. So I've been pretty wrapped up. So for the Italian translation, I actually worked on this after the editor had worked on it, and it took me about 5 or 6 weeks. And I was reading this line for line in Italian, then putting it into some program, seeing what that program came up with. And what was interesting is that the Italian would be like this long and the English would be this long. And it took me hours and hours to get the English this long instead of this long. And so I had to argue with the editor and so I'm just saying that that actually took quite a bit of work. It also allowed me to read again very carefully, having read so many times, even to the extent of using random numbered tables to read chapters out of order, to read from back to front, everything, and just trying to look for typos and edits. So that has been pretty time consuming, um, but I see this story as continuing with Bianca. We know that Antonio's story. There's quite a bit about what happens to him, and he takes over the casino,
Nice. Ooh,
the historic Antonio. Yeah.
that's great to hear because I could absolutely spend more time with Bianca. Thank you so much for taking the time to share her story with us and this book. I can't wait to recommend it to our patrons.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for having me on the show. And I'm so excited that you've got such a strong connection to Florence. If you just take the author's note, 1.5 pages, and if you can go back to Florence and just go to those places, you'll find Bianca.
Oh, that's I'm so glad I have that resource because I need to get back there. So thank you.
Okay, of course. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And thank you, listeners. It is now time to close this chapter. We'll see you next time.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.